and welcome to this conversation between myself, Mark Sturgeon, and Phil Cummins. I'm David Atkinson, Headmaster at Dr. Challoner's Grammar School. Mark is my colleague, Headmaster at Aylesbury Grammar, and I'll ask Phil to introduce himself in a moment. We're doing this because the two schools are working together on a number of projects to do with developing students' character. We have a view that education is a very broad thing, and we want our students to develop into the best versions of themselves they can and to be really positive contributors to society. To help us do that, we're involved in a number of projects, particularly one at the moment looking at how students acquire character through their education. And to help us with that, we're working with Phil Cummins, who is based in Australia, who works with schools around the world. And this gives us a chance to draw on expertise from schools like ours across the whole world, and also contribute to that development of education in a genuinely global way. So I'm going to ask Mark to introduce himself and then hand over to Phil. And we're going to run this as a sort of conversation between the three of us for the next 15 minutes or so. Mark.
Yeah, so hello everybody. My name is Mark Sturgeon, Headmaster here at Aylesbury Grammar School. It's been a privilege to lead the school on this journey that we have in nurturing character in our students here, and also within our staff as well, and upskilling all of them in what it means to develop character in young people. And I don't think there's ever been a more important time in our history, certainly in my time in education, where character is going to be so important for young people when they enter into the workplace and into adulthood especially. So working with David at Dr. Challoner's and other schools in the UK, when we led a regional conference on character in January, but also then, as David said, being part of the international dimension of learning from other environments, other cultures, other education systems about really what it means to develop character in young people and how important that is for our own students, but also for us to play a role in the development across the world. Phil's been inspirational for both of us in helping us to develop our ideas and our thoughts. And so I'd like to hand over to him for an introduction.
Thank you very much, Mark and David. Hello, everybody. My name is Phil Cummins. I've got the pleasure of leading a company called A School for Tomorrow, and also being the director of a research institute called Circle, the Centre for Innovation, Research, Creativity and Leadership in Education. I'm a professor in education and enterprise at 2 Australian universities, and I'm a father of 3 children, 2 boys, one of whom is 23 and one of whom is 22. So I've kind of come out the other end at this point in time. I've really enjoyed the opportunity throughout my career to work in a number of boys and girls schools. I started teaching as a 19-year-old, history and Latin, and worked my way up to being a headmaster, and now work with schools all over the world. Of particular interest has been the work we've done around an education for good character, character and competency and wellness, as we would call it now, working with leading boys' schools all over the world to help define what a character is in the eyes of schools and how you might educate for it. And really happy to be sharing here today.
Thank you very much, Phil. So first question for you to respond to perhaps is that I think Mark and I both believe pretty firmly that education is about far more than exam grades on certificates at the end of courses. And I know that both our schools very much subscribe to that attitude. So what does your international perspective tell us about successful schools around the world and their attitude to that question?
Examinations are a callous reality of life, particularly in the United Kingdom, where so much of the education system is based on progression through to different stages that's determined by opportunities that are based on selection due to examinations. Believe it or not, there are many education systems around the world that work without those sorts of things, and they seem to do a pretty good job. But nonetheless, if you've got examinations, which you do, well, this year perhaps you didn't have quite as many of them, which is a good thing. If you do have examinations, I think it's about balance, and it's about understanding time and place. And it's also about understanding what helps kids perform best in examinations. So 2 short ways of looking at this. Number one, what happens at the age of 17 or 18 is not the whole of life. Now, if my dear late departed father were here, I'd really enjoy saying this to him right now, but because my goodness, did he give me grief around the time of my own high school matriculation examinations in the great state of New South Wales in Australia. But really, it's part of life. It's a transient experience. that has meaning and power for a period of time. But then beyond that, the world today allows kids to go on educational pathways and to take up opportunities that are not necessarily determined by how well they did in a set of exams at a particular age group. The second thing I think that needs to be borne in mind is that performance in examinations depends on a whole range of different factors, part of which is mastery of the content, part of which is mastery of the approach, but most of which comes down to the confidence that students are feeling on the day, particularly boys. One thing that never helps boys develop confidence is being second guessed, is being nagged, is being pressured adversely around this. So we need to work with boys. It's frustrating at times, I know. As I said, I've got two of my own, and they were notoriously gun shy of involving me in the process, as you might imagine. But nonetheless, they did pretty well, and they've done exceptionally well after they've left school. We need to provide an encouraging environment, at times a challenging environment, but mostly a supportive environment. And if you're wondering about the one thing that you can do that will really help boys, feed them and feed them well.
I concur with that massively. I have 3 boys of my own, and yeah, the fridge is often a place where they're congregating. David and I also believe, hugely feel that students have the opportunity to use their education really to help them be a positive force in their communities and in society as a whole. What qualities do you think that we should all, parents and school, be fostering in those students to really make this happen?
Great, fantastic question, Mark. There have been attempts in various different places around the world to prescribe from a sort of a top-down approach, a certain set of values or a certain set of virtues. The first thing that I believe absolutely firmly is that our societies across the world are based in families. So what families believe is good and right to do in the world is the basis of how we keep everything going. So trusting your instincts as a parent is very, very important around this sort of thing. Having said that, consistency in the messaging that you're sending out to your children is very, very important. If it's all laissez-faire and lax up to the age of 17, then you crack the whip. You shouldn't be surprised at that point if your kids turn around and say, well, you gave us the laissez-faire approach, let it play it out. If we were to say developmentally, what develops strong character along the way? 3 things I want people to think about. The first is belonging. It all starts with belonging. If we feel as though we belong, and belonging is encouraged by principles of respect and civility and consideration for others, if we feel as though we belong, then we are more likely to, secondly, achieve our potential. And achieving our potential is about a sense of purpose, about persistence, and about reflection. Boys particularly quite often can steer away from reflection. So if we can encourage that, that's a good thing. If boys feel as though they belong and achieve, then they're more likely to do that which is good and right, which is, of course, is about honesty and courage and humility. Now, all these qualities, I don't want to sound as though I'm being prescriptive around them. This is what our study of boys' schools around the world and communities of boys' schools all around the world suggested were the most important qualities to draw on. But wait, there's more. There's a second set of things that I want you to think about. If those 3 things are the process of development, then what's the outcome? What's the product that we're trying to get towards? And there are 6 things in particular. We want young men who are good people, first and foremost. We want young men who are future builders. We want them to be continuous learners and unlearners. We want them to be solution architects, to be responsible citizens, and we want them to be team creators. Again, this is what communities all around the world in various different types of languages say that they want for their boys. So in terms of process, belonging, the achievement of potential, doing what is good and right, and then those 6 graduate outcomes, good person, future builder, continuous learner and unlearner, solution architect, responsible citizen, and team creator.
Thank you, Phil. There's a lot to digest there, and I think we'll come back to some of those ideas in a moment or two.
Yeah, absolutely.
You talked there about the role of parents and families. Parenting's a pretty tough job at the best of times. I think we can all agree that, the three of us, we've all got children and are rising to those challenges. And I know that a lot of people have found it particularly tough during the last 6 months with the pandemic. What advice can you offer parents to help best support their children at this time in these circumstances?
I would say, knowing both of you very well as I do, that you're way more qualified to answer this question about parenting than I am. And maybe you should ask my children as to whether or not I did a halfway reasonable job. I think these are very weird and unusual times that we're living in at the moment. We don't know really what the impact in the long term or even in the short term is of this jumping into and out of lockdown, this omnipresent threat of illness, strange social circumstances around it. It's a very unusual time. I'm going to take an analogy from the world of cricket and say that letting one go through to the keeper is a really good idea at this time. For those who are not so cricket focused, it's the idea of erring on the side of caution before biting back when your boy does something that is obviously just not the smart thing to do at a point in time, or it says something that is inappropriate. The pressures and the stresses of going through school and of adolescence, particularly within a highly competitive examination-based system, are patent to all. As I said earlier, if it's a necessary evil, it's a necessary evil. Boys need boundaries at all times, but they also need a sense of humor. They need to follow the rules, and every now and then they just need to have some fun. They need to know that you're in charge, but they also need to know every now and then that they've got one up on you. You know, so there's balance to be achieved around these sorts of things. I think out of everything, I would be focusing on sleep more than anything else. Boys need as much sleep as they can get within an agreeable routine. They need to be going to bed at a reasonable hour, getting up at a reasonable hour, and they need to be device free for a period of time before that. And hopefully when they wake up in the mornings, boys need to be exercising every single day. And that means that video game use needs to be rationed out, even if it's fun and even if it's an escape. It's a different type of escape to walking out in the fresh air and in the sunlight. Sunlight's really, really important. And as I said earlier, good diet. I mean, this is just basic stuff really, isn't it? But, you know, the evidence around school performance in the United States is really illustrative here. You know, if we give kids exercise and we feed them well and they sleep well, they'll do better at school. The final thing I think is that boys are very, very deeply connected to their friends. You know that already. Now, some boys have lots of friends. Other boys have just one or two very close friends, and other boys struggle because they have no friends. Those connections with friends are very, very important. That old-fashioned approach of denial of basic needs to curb negative behaviors, I don't think I'd be working with that at this point in time. I think instead I'd be working with boys to set goals, to set rewards for good behavior. There's a great project we've been doing with a school in New Zealand, a whole boarding house for students in New Zealand, where they've turned around from negative consequences to positive consequences. It's amazing what 14, 15-year-old boys will do for one small packet of McDonald's fries.
Good diet, that, Phil. Good diet. Good character, Phil, the term that's used very frequently, and perhaps sometimes without really thinking about what it means. As parents and educators, if we want to raise children of good character, what really should we be focusing on, do you think?
Okay, so again, terrific question, Mark. I think that boys are going on a journey. They're going on a personal journey of exploration and encounter and discovery. Somewhere along the way, they need to discover something that looks like excellence that they can aim at. But by and large, they're going to find that to start within things that they're good at and that they enjoy. Along the way, little boys, you know, when they're 3 or 4, they have a natural and normal self-centeredness. We want them to have it. It's called the theory of self. It's actually can be a concern when that doesn't develop properly. Sometime from the age of 3 or 4 onwards, that sort of very early adolescent stage, which now, of course, kicks in around about 9, 10 or 11. It doesn't kick in at 12, 13, 14 for most boys now. But around that early stage of adolescence, as I intimated earlier, their friends become everything. And it becomes about you. It becomes about the connection with friends. Somewhere around about the age of 15 or 16, boys suddenly discover this notion of us, that there is a world beyond themselves and their family and their friends, and they need to find connection with it. And that's the notion of a purpose or a vocation or a calling or indeed service as a whole. So if you call it the journey from me to you to us, I think that's a great way to think about it to start with. Most of the boys at both of your schools, and I very much enjoyed my visits to both of your schools and the conference last year, cracking conference, beautifully hosted and very well put together, a great learning experience and great collegiality. The boys at your school are entering that stage where they're going from the you stage to the us stage. And that's all about selflessness. Good character in an adult is recognized almost universally around the world now as the propensity to put the needs of others before yourself. So what we need to be doing is modeling that as closely as possible. Boys do strange things during their adolescence. One of them, of course, is that notion of acting out, where they'll deliberately distance themselves from their parents, and at the same time, all of their worst sort of behaviors are visited upon those who are closest to them, who are their parents. So, it's pretty hairy sort of times for many parents. The reality is that work that you are doing right now will pay off 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 40 years from now, 50 years from now. That platform that you're laying of selflessness itself will be visited when your boy is in that position with his own family and is doing the same sort of thing with his own family. And if it gives you any consolation, if you're getting grief now, he's going to get grief later. All right. So that's that sort of intergenerational reward and punishment sort of thing that we get. I think if we want to boil it down to anything, helping boys to develop a sense of purpose beyond themselves right now is probably the most important thing we can be doing. Helping them to set goals and institute plans in relation to that, and holding themselves accountable for everything they say they're going to do in a day is important. Don't expect them to plan a month in advance. Sometimes just a day at a time is enough, or a week at a time. But they need to get into the routines and habits that will enable them to know who they are, that's self-awareness, earn their place, and that's relationship, go on that journey from me to you to us, and that's service, and to find their calling, which is that vocation.
Thank you, Phil. We've used lots of good and interesting vocabulary in this conversation, and the last thing I'd like to ask you to explore is just your views on whether it's possible to have a shared mutual understanding of the vocabulary that we've used, or whether it's more important and more beneficial for each of us to kind of work through what we mean by that vocabulary ourselves.
Yes, I think that's a very, very interesting question. The first thing I think is it presupposes that you've actually got a shared vocabulary, and at times when you're working with boys and they're not being particularly communicative, you can really struggle to get anything beyond a half sentence or an occasional grunt, which doesn't mean they're not interested. It just means they're not interested at that point in time, and there's other things on their minds. I think laying that platform of vocabulary is particularly important. Boys need analogy, they need stories, they need examples to capture their imagination. Leaving something in an abstract or a conceptual phase really doesn't work. Talking about selflessness as an abstract concept isn't going to help you share an understanding of the behaviors. So the vocabulary is important. The most important part is, what do the behaviors look like? So, I can very comfortably tell stories to my family about my father and how hard he worked, and about how he put off things that he might have wanted to do himself to work for the family. My father wanted to be an artist all his life. He grew up in the Depression in London, and his father said, got to get a real job. So he became an architect. He deferred that passion that was inside him until he was in his 60s, really. And then he got the opportunity to go on, and he went and got a PhD and He actually got his 3 months before me, which was mighty unfortunate. But being able to tell my kids that story about my dad and making heroes out of your own family is a really good way of explaining this is what selflessness looks like. This is what connection looks like along the way. I'm a very big believer, for example, that leaders eat last. And training people at the dinner table to look after other people before you help yourself. I think that sort of thing that sort of tangible stuff is really important. So it's not just about sharing conceptual vocabulary. It's also about sharing, if you like, a vocabulary of behaviors, the way we do things here. I think that is a really comfortable way of doing it. As far as a community is concerned, every community needs norms. Every community needs an agreed language about not just what is acceptable or not acceptable, because that's compliance language. And if we're only going to aim for compliance, that's a bit grim. I think we can aim to aspire to things that are better than just making the grade. We need to have something that's going to elevate us. I mean, particularly at times like this with fear and worry all around us, we need hope, we need optimism, we need enthusiasm for the future, and we need to believe that our boys, in becoming the men they're going to be, they'll be the ones who will do that for us.
Well, first of all, can I just say thank you to Phil for spending some time with us this morning. I know it's very late in Australia, so it's a late evening for you. So thank you very much for coming on and sharing your wisdom. As a parent, I find that incredibly informative, particularly when reflecting on my own strategies that my wife and I use at home with our children, and some things resonate quite clearly with us, and some of the challenges that you clearly have seen across the world are very common in just my household, let alone households probably across our school community and David's school community as well. So I'm sure there are many practical tips that parents will be able to take from that, as well as, and maybe as well, inspiring a deeper academic understanding of some of the ways in which we can bring up young people in today's modern world. And I was reflecting on one aspect of it, really, about friendships that you rightly raised, and the way in which they come across with social media, and the way in which young people today conduct their friendships, which is vastly different to the way David and I would have conducted our friendships when we were at school, when the technology didn't exist. But even in the pandemic, using their phone, my sons are communicating with their friends, and we have to be careful not to withdraw all of that, so that they can maintain that sense of belonging with their friends, but also managing it in a way in which doesn't become too much overbearing on their completely and entire life, and having time around the dinner table and talking as a family is really, really important as well. So I think you've really well done brought out that idea of balance between lots of these different aspects of development, and thank you very much for also providing us and maybe many of our parents with a language that we can all use when discussing some of these issues. Again, thank you very much for coming online and sharing that with us, and we look forward to presenting this to our parents, and hopefully they will take away as much as I have in this conversation. So thank you very much, Phil.
Oh, thank you very much, Mark, and thank you very much, David. I've got very, very fond memories of the evening we had in January in the cold, when I think it was about 2 degrees and it was pretty wet outside. And I think we had about 200 parents and friends gathered in the room talking about parenting. That was quite a special night for me. I've really appreciated the opportunity to connect with Dr. Chalmers Grammar School and Aylesbury Grammar School as part of the international project that we're doing on character education that stretches across 4 different continents. It's a tremendous privilege to be welcomed into a school community and to be trusted to share stories and to reveal things that you might see as an outsider that insiders sometimes don't see. So thank you very much. And to all the families, hang in there. Christmas will be soon.